at KCA right now. It's my thesis work, so I worked on it all year, and I'm just going to kind of take you through that. So my series is called You Are Here, and the talk that I'm going to give today follows linear time, but where I make the work from disrupts it. So that's why I'd like to start with a line from a novel that I read a few years ago that's been stuck in my head ever since. It reflects upon something that I'm going to be talking a lot about today, which is the in-between state. So starting here, I'm going to navigate through a timeline of projects, thoughts, experiences that led me to the in-between state and the work that I make as a result of being there. I am hanging, fall breaking between this world and the next. Time me, would you? Yes, you. It's you I'm talking to. In the spring semester of 2019, I began researching the concept of heterotopia, which was coined by Michel Foucault in his essay, Of Other Spaces, which was first published in 1984. Foucault defines a heterotopia as an other space, so a placeless place. He lists examples like mirrors, hospitals, and ships, while citing problematic histories of these spaces, being designated for people whose society deemed as other. So these were places of undesirable bodies. He notes racism in prison systems, classism in theaters, sexism in church niches, which were built as places of worship outside of the church for women who were menstruating or had recently given birth, as they were considered unclean. So this diagram that you see lays out Foucault's explanation of where the heterotopia resides. It's essentially the in-between. It's a result of combining utopia and dystopia, but it also exists outside of both. Bear with me. So these are sites or non-sites that lay outside of reality, but they mimic it. And it results in a loss of autonomy for the individual. So I clung to this research immediately, not yet realizing that the ideas I was attached to were related to an internal response within myself. I'd spent the previous year documenting my family in an attempt to make sense of the dynamics and tensions of a home centered around the impending loss of my brother. The house itself, where I was born and still live, became the subject. Everyday domestic space was altered by memory, preparatory grief, and entropy. I watched through my camera, at the same time an observer and a participant, seeking balance between attempted objective image making as a way to understand, a desperate attempt to keep him here, and the knowledge that I couldn't. Turning the camera on the most vulnerable and fragile subject matter, I made room for myself in a setting that there had been no space for me in before. As a result of a lengthy, complicated, and intense investigation of death and dying, years of various traumas began to unearth themselves. My brain decided it was time to protect itself. Combined with the diagnosis of ultra-rapid cycling bipolar disorder, I found myself in a state of dissociation. So I attached myself to heterotopias, or my idea of what I believed that they were, thinking it paralleled my sense of dislocation. I felt like a non-site, neither here nor there. I was numb. My body had become a place of other. I began photographing gas stations, casinos, waiting rooms of car shops, phone booths, public restrooms, parking lots. I identified more with these spaces of transience than I did with my own home anymore. I was no longer connecting emotionally to the home, which is the one place that you're supposed to feel connected to. The images were not doing what I wanted, especially in the context and time frame of an academic setting. They felt half-explained and unresolved. Heterotopia made little sense when applied to my subject matter, and I felt I was trying to make something really big fit in a box that was too small. I realized that to me, heterotopia was a form of metaphorical dissociation. My home was an architectural version of that dissociation, my space of other. The same artifacts, living rooms, mantles, chairs, cups of coffee that I'd photographed in my series about my family had become a representation of something outside of myself. I could use this uncanny effect I wanted in my images of heterotopia as a method to speak about the dissociation. This estrangement effect, the uncanny defamiliarization, pointed directly back to the effects of preparatory grief. But what was it about my work that was really evoking these feelings? These effects were being used as tools that were given names and heavily discussed in works like those of Russian formalism. Viktor Shklovsky, in his essay Art as Device, coined defamiliarization as a means to distinguish poetic from practical on the basis of perceptibility, so a device for making strange. In Russian formalist literature, the fabula, or raw material of the narrative, and the syzhut, which is the plot or the formation of a narrative, are implemented as temporal displacements. So, for example, placing effects before their causes, which disrupts linear time. I understood these movements, though based in verbal language, as describing a process of perception as an aesthetic means, so a vehicle or tool that I could just use to provoke a feeling. I don't know why that little gray line showed up. Does anyone else see that? Okay, it might just be my screen, sorry. All right. So Freud, love him or hate him, when reflecting on the uncanny valley, he stated, "It is true that the writer creates a kind of uncertainty in us in the beginning by not letting us know, no doubt purposefully, whether they are taking us into the real world or a purely fantastic one of their own creation. When the writer pretends to move in a world of common reality, they can situate supernatural events, such as the animation of inanimate objects in the quotidian or day-to-day reality of the modern world. This defamiliarizes the reader, and it provokes an uncanny feeling." The response to this image I made of my home as a metaphorical architectural dissociation, both place and non-place, brought me to my thesis. The lighting is strange. It's almost cinematic. People asked where it was coming from and what was causing it. What was in front of me that I seemed to be looking past? I appeared to float. The architecture is formal, and the crown molding suggests an entrance or an exit that you cannot see. The tired sneakers, the banal "I wish you were here" travel posters, the dollhouse-like quality, these were visual vehicles that allowed me to disorient or make strange. Audience and viewer longed to stay with this piece because it was so familiar yet strange. They wanted to make sense of it. If not, then they were just curious. So I've spent the last few months unpacking what it was about this response that I was so attracted to, why I wanted it, how to achieve it, especially through more images. The removal of automatism of perception became the goal, to defamiliarize, dissociate, and estrange, to undermine image structures in ways that we recognize but cannot access. What is true of the writer described by Freud can be true when applied to visual studies, a perception as means to effect. In this case, how does this apply itself to a photographic series? The concept of defamiliarization in visual imagery begins around a conversation of perspective in painting, and in architectural blueprints and in drawing. Here, in this work by Vermeer, perspective indicators, typically what we use to navigate an image, are suppressed, except for in one doorway center left, that leads the eye into a frame within a frame. It throws us into a different world. Expectations for perspective have been undermined, and we feel slightly off. Photographer Richard Whitlock implements a method called orthogonal projection in this image, Hospital. The view we see, as the camera, does not exist this way in real space. Multiple perspectives are stitched together to flatten the plane. He creates an image that is impossible because we cannot see this many angles or perspectives at once. And if we could, our eyes do not understand this space because we would be physically unable to move through it. While reading his works on non-perspectival photography, which he claims disorient and dislocate us, I began to think about what it means to look at a monocular image taken by a camera with one eye, or lens, while we see binocularly, or stereoscopically. The pupillary distance between the adult human eyes is about an average of 2 to 3 inches. If you close your left eye, you lose the information there, and the same with your right. But together they create a sort of panoramic view, so we don't lose information in the periphery. So we're viewing a 2D image in stereo in daily life, but could viewing a stereo image in stereo push this sense of the unfamiliar even further? Does a new relationship between vision and viewing form when pushed beyond the stereoscope? What happens when the same image is additionally shot from multiple perspectives, like this one that we just saw? What does it do to the space? Does it become hyperreal? Or does your brain automatically or subconsciously correct the information to make it easier to comprehend? Can you tell that something is a bit off, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is? That was my goal. By masking and stitching multiple vertical perspectives, each point shot stereoscopically, I was able to reconstruct my childhood home as it does not exist, manipulating and creating or removing information and forms that blurs your immediate understanding of it. Once it is realized that there is not a typical vanishing point perspective we're accustomed to throughout the entire image consistently, a viewer can find themselves searching around in the space for other things that might seem off. For example, this outlet in the bottom of the frame is shot from a different perspective than the rest of the wall, and additionally a different perspective than the framed artifact above it. While these differences may seem subtle upon first glance, these indicators are used as an entry point to clue you in that something is strange about this space. Without comfortable terrain to attach to, the eye and the brain must work much harder, constantly wandering and rechecking. Richard Whitlock compares this sensation to an eerie, perplexed, and contemplative childlike wonder. The collapse of linear perspective also leads to the collapse of linear time, and it can create a sort of look-around effect, as Hitchcock employed in many of his films. It triggers a desire to be in that space, to lean around it, to see more, as an attempt to understand what's going on. This is furthered by seeing many forms and objects repeated in the series, and it kind of begins to create a map layout of the geography of my home. For example, the banister of the staircase in this image and here. But not enough is given. Here, the familiar, in this case, a domestic space, has been deliberately recontextualized. This perspective, the way in which objects and structures exist in this space, is physically impossible. It can also lead to a larger discussion of why it has been problematic to trust the camera. Historically, we've been bound to the lens as a reference for evidence or a sense of right or true perspective, as we were convinced that the camera was simply mirroring the real world, or what we see is just what it is. Even today, we often subconsciously accept a photographic image as is without question, because we assume that things like perspective and information in it are right, and that the work has been done for us. But non-perspectival photography asks us to interpret for ourselves, to search around, to study, to spend time, to try to understand. These seemingly trustworthy images are heavily manipulated and distorted, yet they mimic representations of actual space. For example, note the top right where the support beam and the corner of the yellow wall meet. This architecture is physically impossible, yet we just kind of accept it. In this way, they can also speak about time. Their temporal nature can be deduced from a specific understanding of how they were made. Via movement of the camera, we're in multiple places at once. Time is accumulated within the pictures without representing it directly. We can see an expanded view through artificial vision, which is one that is lost with human sight. We find ourselves located in multiple places while in one place. This reflection, an attempt to locate and ground, the act of searching for something familiar, it calls to a dissociative state. The in-between, the state of neither being here nor there, and in this case, not existing within the real space, nor within an image of the space. Even broader, can it call into question the emotional weight or lack thereof that humans project onto domestic spaces? This is a particularly relevant question to us now, as we're asked to isolate, to quarantine, and remain inside. Home is typically associated with ideas of safety, comfort, or refuge. Yet now we spend days, weeks, months within the same walls, unable to participate in our normal lives. that comfort has been removed. Our agency of movement and activity has been stripped away. We cannot align ourselves with the external world, and the definition of our internal world is still in flux. We have all now, in a way, found ourselves in an in-between state. Thank you. That is all I have for you today. I'm gonna stop sharing if that's okay, or Jessica, would you like me to keep it up in case I need to go back to something? You're on mute.
Yeah, let's go ahead and leave it up for a couple minutes,
Yeah.
and we can open it up to everyone and do some Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate you sharing so much about your process. It's so interesting. It is really fascinating how you look at these images and you're like, wait, that is normal. No, it's not. What's happening here? You can definitely see that more is going on. And I just really appreciate that. That you sharing your secrets with us a little bit. It's really fascinating how you create these images.
I think something that when I was making them that was really difficult was finding that balance of like how much is enough. Definitely, because there were a few times, like in this one, you can see if you look closely that the doorway is like, the doorways are kind of messed up and they lead into rooms where they shouldn't be. And the first time I had done it, it was just absolutely bonkers and everyone was like, that's way too much. So it was interesting trying to find that balance of like, how much is just enough to clue people in and not just be obvious or over the top, because, you know, part of that is that it is asking people to stay and kind of look really close and be like, you know, so definitely a difficult balance for sure.
Well, I think you've really achieved a really nice balance actually with all of them. I think the more I knew about your process, I definitely would start to pick up on it a little bit more.
Yeah,
and it's
sure,
just
thank you.
Really interesting, for sure. Does anyone have any questions for Scout? You can unmute yourself and feel free to speak, or you can put it in the chat box and we can
I don't bite.
go that way. Now I have a question. I don't know if you said this, but are these all images that were actually taken within your childhood home and then you pieced them together and kind of made?
Yeah, these are all within the same house. All four of them except for this one actually were taken on the first level, and then I started to go upstairs. I was working my way up, and I think I would love to continue to do that for sure, but I ran out of time. So in each of these, there's about like, I don't know, anywhere between 20 to 40 different photographs like incorporated in some way. So, you know, like taking it at each level twice, you know, from multiple angles, and then some that vary. So having all of those together at once, you know, each image took a ridiculous amount of time to make everything, stitch everything together and make it look cohesive and not just like a crazy mess of layers.
Oh, I can't even imagine, because they are so seamless. I was thinking, like, when you first started speaking and looking at the imagery, do you find yourself curating the spaces, or are they as you live in them in your home? Like, were you bringing in different props or doing things like that?
Yeah, definitely. There was a lot of discussion, I think, in school, at least with my critiques as I was going through the process of, you know, what the difference between digital intervention and physical intervention within the space, and how much are you altering, how much are you doing physically before you take the images versus after. And there was, you know, I wanted it to be like, this space could either be someone's obvious home, or it could be one of those strange like interior design tour homes that you see set up sort of somewhere in between there. That was like in this one, you can see there's images of a family and you can kind of like start to piece it together. There's like smudges on the mirror, so you know someone's been touching it, but everything just looks so clean and removed and cold and a little bit sterile. So I think, again, that was another thing. It was like a fine balance between the two, and not being super heavy-handed. This one was the first one I did, so it's a little bit different here. Just with like, I kept that bookcase, you know, how much did I need to take out of there? Let me go back. I physically took everything off of the shelves in this one, but then I ended up having to like pixel it in, most of it by hand anyway, so it didn't really matter. And some of it's just artifacting, like those little roses that you see in front of me. There's just two of them because it was a result of combining multiple images together. So there's only one, but it looks like there's two. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Cool. That's really interesting. I know I really love the first one that you showed among the others, but I love that you kept that family portrait in the bookshelf. I feel like
Oh,
every time I've looked at your work in the
thank
gallery
you.
and here during your presentation tonight, I'm like immediately drawn to that because it kind of gives a hint into a
Really? You
narrative
think
of like who this woman is, what's going on. Here's her family picture. There's
sure.
like, it kind of starts to create that a little bit. I really enjoy
Yeah, I
that.
think, yeah, it's like, is this her family or is this just
Right.
a family, you know? And like, is she waiting for them to come home? And you see the chairs kind of pulled out in front, so it's like, is somebody coming? So I think like raising those questions is just a huge part of what I wanted to do, you know, have questions be raised and make people a little bit like confused, like, I don't really get it. And that's, I enjoy that. I think that's important with artwork, is raising
Yeah.
questions.
It keeps people engaged with the
For
work,
sure. For sure.
definitely.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'll open it. Anyone have any questions or comments or anything you'd like to say to Scout?
Not all at once.
Clap. We can unmute to clap.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Awesome.
I'm gonna stop
Hi,
sharing.
Salva and I want to congratulate Scout for her work.
Hi! I didn't see you, Arachu.
It's amazing what you've presented, extremely articulate, and the image and your voice worked really well together. And it was very well-researched topic, and I'm very impressed. So
Thank
congratulations.
you so much. That means a lot coming from you. I really appreciate it. Mwah!
That's so sweet. Okay, we'll just take a moment. Yep, we'll undo the screen sharing. I'm going to introduce Carmen, and then we will start with her talk. Here we go. Okay, welcome Carmen. Carmen is a photographer and multimedia-based artist who just graduated from KCAI in May of 2020. She grew up in Madrid, Spain, and she has been living and making art in America for the past 6 years, splitting her time between New Orleans and Kansas City. This body of work she will be sharing with us is part of her thesis titled Spanglish, I Was There.
Hey everyone, I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna pull the speaker notes. Can you guys see the speaker notes? Ah, okay, I will just do it on my phone. Okay. Sorry, technology takes a long minute. Okay. So, hey everyone. My name is Carmen, and I'm already graduated from the amazing Department of Photography at the Kansas City Art Institute. This is me when I was super young. I grew up in an amazing environment. I love my parents, I love my school, and I did all the artistic activities that I wanted to do when I was young. And I always knew that I wanted to be an artist. So I'm going to start talking about La Americana, which is a project that I did in 2018. La Americana was a series of self-portraits in which I wanted to explore this new feeling of a Spanish American citizen and a place in between and disorientation. For them, I wanted to combine symbols that reflect this new idea that I had of being new to America and also a stranger back to Spain. So I'm gonna start talking about my thesis, Spanglish, I Was There. As some of you know, I was born in Spain, particularly in a small city close to the border of Portugal called Badajoz. And right after I was born, I moved to the Dominican Republic with my parents. I obviously do not remember much about this time of my life. It lasted less than 6 months. And then we moved to Madrid, where I would spend the next 17 years of my life. My parents divorced when I was very, very young. And not shortly after that, my dad moved to Panama City, Panama. I guess was my first real encounter with immigration. This experience was very difficult for me As a kid at young, I did not understand distance as I understand it now. I didn't understand what the distance would mean physically and emotionally for me. Personally, that first time was my dad was extremely sad, but now I understand how immigration is a sign of bravery, and I admire my dad for teaching me to be that kind of bravery. After the project of La Americana, I spent the summer in Madrid when I started to think about what I was going to do for my thesis. Like most seniors, I had no idea what to do. I started to look at my archive of photos for the past 5 years, and I started to reflect in my last project, La Americana, and how this idea of disorientation of places that I call home could transform into a project. After the summer, I came back to America with the idea that I wanted to work with my archive. I felt that using archive photographs would spoke from a different point of view, a point of view that wasn't aware of this project in which the camera captured the surroundings in both countries that were new and old, exciting things would happen, and I will take photos of it, and 2 American and 2 Spaniards things will capture my mind. And I was like, oh my God, this is 2 Americans, this is 2 Spaniards. At the same time, I was doing research of Hispanic American artists, and I found Lucia Rivera's work. She's a Dominican American artist who uses images and combines them into collage, and then she uses in multiple ways to talk about issues such as class and culture. Her work then inspired me to use my archive as a collage. I started to look at the archive and separate the photos in America and in Spain albums. So then I would make easier for me to combine and go back and forth with collage. Then I went ahead and created a series of collages chronicling my experience as a dual citizen. I create unreliable spaces combining these photos to mirror how I perceive the experience as an immigrant in America and as an outsider in Spain. The viewers are confronted in a sense of disorientations in a space that lies between the graphic and the photographic. At the time, I wasn't sure how it could work the best way to use collage, so I just simply started to play around. Then one random day, I was looking at Instagram, like the most of us, and I found the amazing world of resin. It was everywhere on my Instagram, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. People can do amazing things with this material. I wonder if I can combine the idea of collage plus resin. So I started to look around and I found Sebastian Wall. Sebastian Wall is an American artist who actually worked with collage and resin. His work is very different than mine, but he would create this amazing, crazy world resin collage. And then I was like, oh my God, if this dude can actually make these crazy good collages with resin, I can make it too. So there I went. I started to combine my archives together. I then had specific photos in my mind that I was like, okay, I want to put them together. So it was actually very random at first. I just combined photos that I thought that they would look together good and had a good composition, but also have this sense of disorientation that I was experiencing being in America and in Spain at the same time. And then I put resin in between layers. This is a photo of my COVID-19 setup studio at home. So also thank you so much to my partner, because we didn't have that space to eat lunch or dinner because I had to set up my studio there. And I think the video. So this is how the final look would be. Of course, it's not the same on a screen because this is still a 2D experience than what the 3D would actually be looking. So what the resin would do is that it creates like this sense of depth in between the layers. My experience is held in my memories, in my letters, in my photo archive, and now I combine that experience in the past 5 years to construct spaces in which I swear I've been in all of them. And that's it.
Yay.
Yay.
Wonderful, Carmen. Thank you so
Congrats.
much for sharing about your work. Yes. I gotta say, I really, really enjoy your work, and your technique with the resin is perfect. I don't know how many of you got the chance to come into the gallery while the work has been up, but that resin, I could not believe. I was looking at it from the side, from the front, but I was like, it's perfect. I can't imagine. It's just, it is beautiful.
Thank you. Well, I don't know how many of my peers from KCI photo are here, but they can tell you how many tries I had with a lot of bubbles that wouldn't want to come out and didn't want to cooperate in this project, but it ended up happening, which is crazy, in my home, which any of us would have imagined that that's how the year will end up like.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. My heart has gone out to all the young people around the world who are missing out on their graduations. It's just so unfortunate, but you still created this incredible body of work on your kitchen table. So
Yeah.
that just shows you that post-graduation, anywhere you go, anytime in your life, you can make art wherever you are. You don't need a big fancy studio or anything like that. But I'd like to open it up if anyone has any questions for Carmen. Anyone wants to put those in the chat box, or go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to ask questions, chat on any topics.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Sylvia, and I'm also an alumni from the photo department and currently based in San Jose, California. Carmen and Scout, congratulations both, because I'm just so happy, and I've seen you grow, and I've worked with them both, and they're literally incredible and intelligent artists that I'm just very fortunate to know. I guess I'm curious, once COVID hit and having to transition from being into an immediate studio while still kind of working within your thesis, and then kind of transitioning from, you know, a large space or an accessible space now to a limited one stable space, were you thinking about new ways of how you were kind of navigating space in general, since you both kind of are always working with constructed spaces, looking at new ways of how we're kind of navigating and engaging with it, being in one spot? Did you get a chance to kind of experiment with that or explore that concept?
I started to create because I was also in another class, and then KCI started a new project for COVID. So I started to take photos, projecting places that I'd rather be. So I projected a beach in the Dominican Republic and took a photo on my bathtub pretending that I was on the beach with a mojito. It wasn't like a project that I'm like the most proud of, but it was fun to experiment in other ways with the new world that we are experiencing right now. I don't know if Scout has other ways that she has been going through this.
Yeah, I think for me, what a lot of it changed was thinking about home as our space. And Sylvia, I know that you and I have exchanged a few notes about that because you care a lot about that too. And I think I sent out a bunch of things. I was like, okay, everybody tell me how your relationship to home or whatever domestic space that you're in right now has changed, like once all this started, you know? And a lot of people, like, there was varying, you know, some people were like, oh my God, get me out. But some people, it was really interesting. They were like, okay, I know that I'm going to be here. So how can I make this home feel like home? You know, see, people would go out and buy plants, or people would go out and like redecorate, or they'd go and do this. So I think like people were doing a lot of like world making within their own home. And the relationship between us and our domestic space at home is like that safety, that comfort, right? And it became even more exacerbated when like this fear of being in the outside world or fear of being around other people, you know? And I think what'll be really interesting is if that continues and how that's going to change. You know, I think it has already, people are obviously getting sick of being at home because they're not staying home, which they should be. But it's going to be really interesting to see long term how that relationship changes and, you know, just what other forms it takes.
Yeah, Carmen, I have a question. What made you kind of turn to doing like I don't know the correct term, but like physical collage versus digital collage. Like when you look at your works and you look at the size and you can see that like there's a photo, a layer of resin, a photo, like actual tangible collage.
Yeah.
What kind of made you play with that versus just digitally collaging them?
They kind of like, I know that I was talking about before and after resin, but they kind of came at the same time. It could have been like a day or two in between. I thought at the moment that the material of resin would help me to talk more about this sense of in-between spaces and the immigrant experience that one person can live to be in between two worlds, but in their mind being in one. And I thought that the resin would totally help me to express that feeling that I was having. And I was also very excited to try new things.
Yeah. I think it is really successful because it does create that dimension when you look at the images in person. It is like 3D. I'm not describing it too eloquently, but it really does create that space between the layers.
And when you get on, like when you look directly to the photograph, you can only see one image per se, one collage. But then when you go to the side, you can actually see the layers and you can actually see the resin that is in between each one. And I think that to me was very important to have that material to express that we live in through experiences that had built into the woman that I am today and how this experience had shaped that.
That's wonderful. And just listening to you both speak, it's really interesting to me how actually both of your work does play with like tricking the viewer's eyes and perspective a little bit in different ways, but you do kind of experience both of your work where you have to kind of dig in a little bit further and pay attention and engage with the work a little bit further. And I really appreciate that.
I think
it's really
definitely
well done.
Carmen said the word unreliable in her talk, and I think that's something that both of us realized like right away when we both started our separate projects. We were like, wow, we're thinking a lot about really similar things. We're just approaching it in very different ways from our own subjective experiences. So I think that like something is not as it seems, you know, something is asking you to like engage with it and like try and talk to it sort of. I think we both were super excited by that process.
Well, that's really incredible, and what a gift. It really is exciting for me to hear you say that, because it really shows that you're in tune with yourself and definitely your artistic ability to communicate what you're feeling and kind of tap into that. And I can't wait to see what you guys create next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And does anyone else have anything to say or share this evening before we wrap it up?
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just interested now that you are done and still we're kind of like sheltered in place essentially. How are you considering your photo practice being in one space while considering what space is and what could be for the future? Thinking about how we are able to kind of rebuild, like first like maybe grieve space and then heal the space and then rebuild or reform that space from one location you're in, and maybe kind of envisioning of other spaces that you either have experienced or haven't experienced. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. I think it's all like everything is in such an incredible state of flux right now. We're all experiencing, of course, so much uncertainty that it's insane and nauseating. So having to like strip your definitions or your familiarity with things that you've assigned, whether it be space or a person or whatever, we're having to just rip everything down right now because nothing makes sense. So to be in this state, it literally is the in-between. It's like things that as we knew them are no longer, and they won't be, but we don't know what it looks like. So we're just kind of waiting, sort of, and engage. Of course, we're like doing active things with each other to try and be better. But I think just that act of like you said, I think the grieving is the hardest part. Of course, just to accept that our lives aren't going to be this way anymore, I think is really challenging. And in terms of like my practice, I am really sick of making work in my home, because all throughout college I was pretty much I had so much to talk about, just about home and my family and memory and all these things. And it was so exciting to me that I was able to tap into those experiences and talk about them finally. Photo way to do it, but I am so sick of making work at home, and it has nothing to do with the pandemic because it was happening before. So I'm really excited to expand it in other ways and go outside, and make work there. So I think, again, that home being stripped away from what it meant before, and it's no longer a place of practice,
Carmen, it's fantastic to see how you have reflected your identity and your evolution with your own identity into photographic expression. And your dad and I are very proud of you.
Thank you. Answering Sylvia, I'm going to step in that question. I agree with Scott, or pretty much with everyone, because I feel that everyone thinks this way. Everything has started to like break down, and having to be close at home has made me think into a lot of stuff. And the new work that I'm working on is that I should apply soon for my citizenship. So I was like, what if instead of that, I'm going to make them give me my citizenship, showing that I'm a true American. So I started to collect photos that I feel that make me a true American. And I create a folder about that, and I'm gonna print it and sending to the US Embassy with a letter asking to please give me my citizenship, because I already feel like a true American. So that's the new work that I'm working on right now.
That's incredible. Please put a link or something in the chat box where we can follow the new work, where you will be posting it, because I can't wait. I love that idea. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, what the citizenship, well, my dad became an American citizen very soon, and he was studying the exam, and I was like, well, I feel like I don't need to do that. Like, I do all this American stuff. Like, I just started to like peanut butter and jelly. Like, there is no other level after liking peanut butter and jelly to be American. So yeah, I was like, the exam wouldn't make me feel more American than liking peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Well, I'll actually be interested to see if they change anything on the exam, like after, in years or whatever. I mean, really though, because so many things are changing, like legislation's changing and people are changing. So I wonder if like the test will be the same, in a couple of years. That's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Please keep us posted on that process and follow along on your Instagram or your website, however we can find it. Please share it with us. Also, just to let you guys know, we are recording this talk tonight. We are going to share it on our website and our platforms, but if anyone wants me to email it directly to you, just put your email in the chat box, and then you can have like your own copy. Obviously the artist, I'll send it to you guys, but if any family members or anyone wants a copy, just put your email in the chat box. And I just want to say thank you again to everyone for joining us this evening. Definitely check out some of these resources that we shared at the beginning of the talk with you, and please support those organizations. And we appreciate you and all your support for our wonderful and talented emerging artists. Thank you for having a show with us. It's been a great experience. Thanks for all your patience during this new virtual world. We appreciate you and your artwork.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, thank you, thank you,
Thank you, everyone.
Big kisses.
And cheers.